From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Coming up today out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell with this week's cattle market commentary. He'll discuss the USDA's cattle inventory and cattle on feed reports released this past Friday. Then from a recent Cattle Chat podcast, out of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, the panel will take a look at creep feeding calves as a nutritional bridge to weaning time. Also today, K-State's Rich Llewlyn previews K-State's 2020 Risk and Profit Conference taking place virtually in August. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Wade Weber on the future of Kansas 4-H as impacted by the pandemic challenges. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You are tuned in to Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard once more as we talk cattle markets now with a boatload of new numbers from the USDA out Friday afternoon in the forms of the USDA monthly cattle on feed report, plus that mid-year cattle inventory report. We'll cover it all and much more now with Derrell, Livestock economist, Oklahoma State University. But quickly, Derrell, review of the cash and futures price action this past week ahead of those two reports. And in a sense, the trade was biding its time in advance of those new numbers, wasn't it?
I think so. I think there's several things going on here. Many of the markets were kind of anticipating the reports, not too exciting in these markets, pretty quiet. Part of it's the fact that it's mid-July and it's middle of the summer. We're kind of in the summer doldrums. So, I think for all of those reasons, markets have been pretty quiet here lately.
And we finished the fed cattle market up a tick at the best. Is that a very, very subtle sign of encouragement for that trade?
Well, I think it is in one sense because we know that we still have a backlog of fed cattle out there. You can argue about exactly what the number is. Different people make different calculations. But the fact is we're not, certainly not caught up yet. So the fact that these markets are kind of stabilizing, I think the fed cattle market is trying to find and sort of hold a current level, which is pretty good news given that we are still a ways from being current. And, part of that is predicated on the fact that the boxed beef market also appears to be kind of finding some stability now. Again, recognizing that we're kind of in these midsummer dog days and a little bit weaker demand here, at least for another, couple of weeks.
We'll come back to the boxed beef trade in a bit more detail shortly here. To those USDA reports, let's first look at the cattle on feed report. By all appearances, the pre-report prognostications could not have been much more spot on.
They really were. This report should not cause any ripple effects in terms of being away from expectations. Very well anticipated. The cattle on feed for July 1st was just even with a year ago. Placements were up 2%. The pre-report average guess was a little bit higher than that, but not significantly different. Marketings were up about 1%. This was a quarterly report as well, so it included a breakdown of steers and heifers on feed. The steers came out just even with a year ago, and the heifers were just 1% less, 99% of last year. So really no surprises in this market at all.
So the cattle on feed report may take a bit of a back seat to the cattle inventory report, and the market does tend to anticipate this in advance quite a bit. And once again, no earth-shaking results from that either, though, Derrell.
Really not. This report was also very well anticipated. The trade was not looking for any major changes. Probably the biggest question mark about the mid-year inventory report was sort of how do we factor in the fact that we do have this backlog of feedlot cattle, which are still out there now, and they would not have been there otherwise. So it's kind of trying to anticipate what it would have looked like in the absence of that. But the bottom line is the all cattle and calves inventory is basically even with a year ago. It probably would have been down just fractionally, had we not had the situation that we have. The number of cows, beef cows were down about 0.8%, just about exactly as expected. In general, dairy cows were up a tick. That was also expected. So the overall cow number was down just fractionally, and actually even with a year ago, or just slightly down. The rest of the categories were really very close to last year. The other heifers inventory was up slightly. The steer inventory was up slightly. Again, that probably reflects the fact that we do have a few more cattle in the feedlots than we would have had otherwise. But there's really nothing dramatic in this. The calf crop estimate for this year is down 0.8% or thereabouts, and again, very close to expectations.
Once again, though, one has to look at the caveat of the market disruptions, as you say, because of the pandemic. As far as a takeaway from the cattle inventory report, is it in its own way suggesting that we're seeing that contraction at a very modest pace still?
Well, I think that's obviously the question that we're always looking for, is kind of an indication of what we're doing longer term in a cattle cycle sense. I think we're still on pace to I'm going to call it sideways to slightly lower numbers. It probably does reflect a very modest level of contraction. I almost hesitate to even call it a contraction. It's really a very, very, almost a sideways kind of a movement. So I don't think we're seeing any indication. And that's been one of the questions, is did all the disruptions this year provoke maybe a stronger liquidation on the part of cow-calf producers? And, the second half of the year will probably ultimately determine that more so maybe than what we've seen to this point. But there's certainly nothing in this report to me that would indicate that we have any significant level of liquidation, even though we're probably drifting somewhat lower in cattle numbers overall.
All right. Back to boxed beef and what you referred to as, well, it could be termed this way, the seasonal sluggishness of that trade at this time of the year. Makes one wonder, though, how much longer that trade will be under the kind of pressure that it has been enduring for several weeks now, Derrell.
Well, that's right. I mean, again, we're putting a lot of meat on the market, so boxed beef, total beef production, I should say, in the third quarter here is projected to be up 5.5% to 6%. We've been running more like 3 to 4% some weeks up. Slaughter is running very close to year-ago levels, down 1 to 2% from year-ago levels. But with carcass weights as heavy as they are, we're adding the equivalent of roughly 24,000 head of steers and heifers a week to that slaughter total, if you figured it at last year's carcass weights. So the bottom line is we're putting more beef on the market after a sharp drop in the second quarter. And obviously there's lots of pork and poultry out there as well. And so there's plenty of challenges. I think you can take the stability, even though it's been pretty sluggish here lately, I think you can take the stability we're holding at this point in time as a relatively positive sign, but certainly we'll be looking for a little bit stronger action here towards the end of July, first part of August. Then we'll be buying meat for Labor Day in terms of kind of our last big grilling weekend. And then as we go beyond that, we'll certainly be watching this for indications of just exactly where we are with overall beef demand in the U.S.
Well, we'd like to finish right here with a news item, and it is a subject of quite some discussion within the cattle industry. The USDA posted its report on its market investigation of cattle and beef pricing following that packing plant fire, the Tyson fire at Holcomb, Kansas last year. It really came to the conclusion that the investigation will continue, to summarize it briefly there. What's your take on what's going on there to the moment, anyway?
Well, in terms of this particular report, I think it does a reasonably good job of sort of documenting exactly what did happen across the various sectors of the market, both in terms of beef and cattle markets. I think, it does a fairly comprehensive job of that. And my reading of it basically is that the report sort of comes to the conclusion that there's really nothing in the actions that happened in the market and the price actions that happened as a result of that seems surprising in some sense. It doesn't rule out the possibility of additional investigation, particularly at the firm level, if you will, looking in more detail. That's what the Department of Justice is going to do. But in terms of the overall market situation, to me, this report kind of says that there was really nothing surprising, nothing that you would not expect to happen given the circumstances, which were extremely unusual, both last summer with the Holcomb fire and even more so this year with the impacts of the pandemic.
One wonders, though, if this topic will ever be off the table, so to speak, Derrell, given everything surrounding it, frankly.
Well, these issues have been around for a long time in one form or another. This is the latest expression of them, and no, I don't think they're going to go away probably anytime soon.
All right. And how do you think the cattle markets will trend in the coming days then, in the wake of those USDA reports?
There's nothing in these reports that would suggest to me any sort of major change of trend in this thing. I think the fed cattle markets, again, are going to kind of rock along here, trying to sort of hold the level we're at until we get to a point. Now, we should start to see some improvement in the overall supply-demand balance in the fed cattle markets. If you go back to the first of the year, January through April, the first 4 months of the year, we placed about 1 million head less cattle in the feedlots than we did a year ago. That should start to show up as reduced flows of new cattle, if you will, coming onto the market here from this point forward. And that should mean that then we have a chance to really make some progress on catching up on this backlog of fed cattle. So I think that market probably will kind of hold its own more sideways than anything going forward, at least until we get a little bit more current in that situation. Feeder cattle markets are kind of slowly grinding higher. Some of that's kind of seasonal, although seasonal patterns have not really meant a whole lot this year. But, the heavier feeder cattle kind of grinding higher. The calves also picking up a little bit, and I think that suggests probably that this calf market is a little bit weaker than we would expect to see it at this time of the year normally. And so we'll be watching that as we go into the fall and sort of see whether or not the normal seasonal impacts kind of kick in.
Very well, then. Always appreciate your viewpoints on these markets, and we'll talk again on down the line. Many thanks to you, Derrell.
You are very welcome.
Livestock economist Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University, with this week's Cattle Market Insight on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today continues. Weaning spring-born calves will soon be on the docket of you cow-calf producers. It's a big transition nutritionally for those calves, and creep feeding can serve as a bridge to that next nutritional stage. That's one of two topics taken up on a recent Cattle Chat podcast by the crew at the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. As always, Brad serves as your moderator.
One of the tools that we can use to put more weight on calves prior to weaning is what's called creep feeding. And I'm going to define creep feeding for our discussion as any supplemental feed that we provide to that calf beyond the pasture while he's still nursing the cow. And I may be thinking about creep feeding to put weight on those calves, or I may be thinking about creep feeding to prepare them for their next phase of life when I wean them. What are some of the considerations you guys have?
Well, first of all, we get this question every summer. I mean, there's interest in whether or not creep feeding really is a good idea, either from an animal health standpoint or from an economic standpoint. And one of the things that I raise, well, can you accomplish it? Do you have the infrastructure? Because, number of pastures, number of cattle that calves you're talking about. So how much feed are we talking about being delivered? How often? So some of the practical, pragmatic parts of, do you have the facility? Is it in shape? Does it need to be repaired? What are the costs associated with the feed delivery methods?
And that could be different if you're doing a self-feed with a limiter in a creep feeder versus if you have a facility that only the calves can get into and you're hand feeding, right? So there's multiple ways you could accomplish it, but you have to assess which makes sense in your operation.
Yep. So physically, can it be done, and what's the cost of getting it done? before you even consider the cost of the feed or the cost of gain.
Weber, what are some of the things you think about?
I think, one of the areas that I sometimes get questions about and think about a little bit is, based on Larson's comment, understanding the cost and the relationship between the value of gain and the cost of gain is certainly an important one, but I think it makes a difference if you're a commercial producer or potentially a seed stock producer, and what's your motivation to use creep feeding as a tool in your nutrition arsenal. And I think for seed stock producers in particular, will sometimes creep feed. Part of it's maybe to have really impressive weaning weights or marketing data for your customers. But I think maybe a more important and tactical tool is making sure that those bulls continue to gain kind of late in the summer when they're on. If we've got spring-born calves and we have a early spring or late winter bull sale, we can't afford to have no gain for a couple of months on those calves and get them to the market or weight endpoint that we want them to at bull sale time. So providing some additional energy and particularly protein supplementation for those bulls and heifers while they're on particularly late season or mature warm season grass can be really important to maintain gain during that period.
Absolutely. And I think how you creep feed, what you're creep feeding, and what your purpose is all play into it. But there's also some economic implications. And Dustin, any considerations there?
Yeah, and Bob mentioned, you understanding what that cost of the gain is. And I think it's more than just the feed cost. I think that Bob kind of alluded to. You need to take into other considerations the equipment, the facilities, labor, et cetera. So those will be just a few things that you want to try to capture all the costs when you're thinking about the cost of gain. And then you want to compare that to the value added of that gain. And we can put in our show notes some information coming out of Nebraska on how you estimate the cost, how you calculate the value of added gain.
And I think I like your comment on cost, because you said it's not just the feed cost itself. It is some of the labor, some of the other things. And even that feed cost, Bob, we may not get as good a conversion on this feed as we would if we just fed it after the calves are weaned. Why not?
Well, one of the things that when you think about feed cost and conversion, it's really feed delivered to the facility, not necessarily feed delivered to the cattle. And at least in my hands, sometimes we've lost a lot of creep feed to wildlife, to wind, to weathering, to rain loss, different things like that. So that's feed that I purchased that doesn't actually get converted into calf growth. Anybody that's put out creep feed, well, maybe I'm only speaking from my own experience, but you do have to worry about wildlife, raccoons, opossums, deer. Who doesn't like creep feed? I mean, everybody walking through the woods really likes a little bit of creep feed. And if you don't have a good way to manage that loss, it's hard to have good conversion when animals I'm not selling are eating up my feed.
Yeah, absolutely. And they will, right? It depends on where our creep, this is back to where's our creep feeder, who's got access to it, and how is that access limited? And certainly you'll have some losses there. We also talked last week about the changing gut. And as that calf is digesting, depending on his stage of life, he's digesting a little bit of milk, a little bit of grass, a little bit of creep feed. The bacteria in his gut have to be split to be able to digest those. So he is not maybe as efficient, but it also matters how long we feed creep feed. So I like feeding creep feed for a relatively short period of time before those calves get weaned, because then at least they understand, and I'm picturing here in my head, I may even feed that in a feed bunk that they have access to, the cows don't, because I want them to understand, hey, this is where I can get feed after they're weaned. What do you guys think about that approach?
I think that can be a really useful strategy as part of kind of a preconditioning program to get bunk broke, feed broke kind of calves for a low stress weaning program. I think that can work very effectively. One of the challenges will be, kind of making sure that, as you put out feed, that it's, appropriate in terms of nutrient content to meet your objectives. And so one of the challenges you can have on these really light calves is that, putting out a 12% crude protein supplement doesn't have enough gas to it to get, particularly if you want upper end of, 2.5 or 3 pounds a day gain, you need a product that's probably closer to 20% crude protein and really palatable to get them to eat it and be attracted to the bunk. But experience is if you put out something really palatable, you have better luck than putting out something that's cottonseed hulls type.
Last topic we wanted to talk about today, a lot of folks are moving cows back and forth potentially between pastures, different areas to match the grass. So we have to do some transportation when it's hot. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the tips of what makes that work better and what are some of the things you consider when you're moving cows at this time of year.
I think one of the keys to working cattle when it's hot is don't, right? So adjust your transportation times to make sure you don't do that during the hot part of the day. In fact, in many cases, it's going to mean early in the morning, so 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, right as the sun comes up, and really trying to get the work done before, even maybe 9 o'clock. I know this morning here, it was already well over 80 degrees by 8:30 this morning, and it doesn't take too much humidity and additional temperature to get into a condition where you've got some heat stress. And if you're a later spring calver, you're kind of in potentially maybe a critical time for embryo implantation or growth. And so you don't want to cause any additional fetal losses due to that heat stress. And so being pretty careful about when you work cattle this time of year can be really, really important.
Absolutely. And we talked some last week about the effect of heat and breeding. And I think you made a really good comment there that I want to pull out is you may be working them at a different time, and early morning is very different than even late evening. So 9, 10 o'clock at night after the sun goes down is very different than 5 o'clock in the morning because of that cool down period. So they'll actually still be heating up. It's hot outside till 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. Even at 9, 10 o'clock at night, they're still heating up.
Hot.
Yeah, they're really hot.
Yeah.
5 in the morning, they've had as much cool down as possible, but you try to do any of that working, moving, anything you have to do early in the morning after a night where you got to a good low temp.
Yeah, and I think that's another key point, is if it only has gotten down into the mid-70s a couple of nights in a row, those animals probably, and the humidity's high, they haven't had as good a chance to dissipate heat as, a night that it gets to 70 or 72. 2, 3, 4 degrees right in that 70-degree range makes a big temperature and overnight cooling of those animals. And so, being cognizant of, if we're 3 days into, some hot weather and it's only been in the mid to upper 70s at night, if you can, delay working cows. Maybe put it off for a few days until, we've got some weather that's a little more desirable.
But sometimes we do have to move them. And if I've got to move them, Bob, what are some of the things I need to think about?
Well, one of the things that I've seen that can be an issue is if you move cattle to a new pasture and they're not really familiar with that pasture, you may need to make sure that they can find the water. A lot of times where we drop them off, whether we're trailing them or trucking them, may not be exactly near their water source. So I would take the extra effort to trail them over to the water right after you get them there so that they can find it. Because again, when we're talking about moving cattle in the summertime, I'm really concerned about heat. And one of the ways we deal with that is make sure there's plenty of available water for them and making sure that they know exactly where that is so that they don't have to wait till the next day to find it.
From the Beef Cattle Institute here at Kansas State University, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, Dustin Pendell, and Brad White. The podcast series easily accessed at bciksu.org, bciksu.org. We'll be back shortly. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And on this part of the program, we'll fill you in on an event that's coming up very soon now. It's an annual undertaking by the Agricultural Economics Department here at Kansas State University, the 2020 Risk and Profit Conference with, as you might imagine, a new twist this year. Rich Llewlyn is over from Agricultural Economics to tell us more about it. He coordinates this program every year. And the theme of risk and profit revolves around the new format here as well, Rich. It has to do with the pandemic and some of the repercussions of that for the agricultural economy.
Yes, that is. We were hoping to hold it in person this year again. It's our 26th year, but we've had to move it online due to some of the restrictions here in Manhattan and because of COVID. So we will have an online meeting, but it won't just be one day. We're going to stretch it out through the week. We realize sitting on the computer and listening to stuff for a long time for a full day can kind of wear people out. So we're going to try 2 sessions a day from Monday to Wednesday, and then on Friday also, with a little bit more on Thursday that week.
So what you will do is wrap the programming around roughly the noon hour or midday with select sessions day by day.
That's correct. We'll have 2 45-minute sessions starting at noon each day on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So 12 to 12:45 and 12:45 to 1:30 each of those days, as well as Friday. And then on Thursday, we'll have a little extra with the livestock and grain market outlooks, and we'll start those at 10:30 and wrap it around the lunch hour too, and then have a couple of sessions after lunch. So it'll be a little more on the day it was originally scheduled on August 13th.
The format is different, clearly, Rich, but the main entree has always been the content of this program. And once more, not much different there in terms of the volume and the quality of it.
Right. We are cutting back just a bit on the number of topics, but we have the livestock and grain outlook that I mentioned, as we usually do. We won't have a keynote speaker this year, but then we have a dozen or so breakout sessions of current research going on in the department, as well as some of the things going on in the economy. We've titled it Economics of Agriculture During the COVID-19 Pandemic, and this is an ongoing discussion. We had some meetings last spring that were kind of focused on this, so this continues some of that stuff.
So give us a flavor of a few of those topics that'll be covered then, in addition to the outlooks that you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, in addition to the livestock outlook, we also have a very practical session on hedging live cattle, where Brian Coffey has looked back over the last 10 years and just compared how that would have gone compared to cash sales, and finds that it does reduce risk and it can be very helpful. Also, the macroeconomy and interest rates, future inflation is a concern, and the ag finance situation, as well as farm income, looking at last year, but also projecting ahead for the next couple of years is what Greg Eibendahl is going to do with that. And then we have some of the things on crop share and cash rent for cropping situations, just comparing how the risk takes place on each of those. Also have some things looking back at the old Farm Bill and some of the decisions that were made there, and that can be helpful in looking ahead. Farmers are going to have to make a decision every year on ARC and PLC, and so knowing what's happened will actually help them look ahead on that.
It's quite a cross-reference of topics and always quite thorough in addressing some of the topical matters in the agricultural economics field. And folks can pick and choose what they want to take in, obviously, Rich.
Right. They can be on live every day, or they can go ahead and just sit in on the ones they're interested in. We'll also have it all recorded and have the slides available online, and so the registration would include the live sessions as well as access to those recordings and slides.
And we didn't bring this up earlier, but it's worth reiterating for whom this program is targeted, producers and otherwise, right?
Producers as well as lenders. We have quite a few ag lenders who will be part of it, assuming it happens kind of like it normally has. Extension personnel, also crop insurance agents have been a large part of it, agribusiness managers and folks involved in that side of it as well. So it's a pretty broad audience that we've had in the past. It may be even a little broader this year, as folks that live out of state that wouldn't be able to attend in person will be able to take part this year.
One other feature we should highlight, there is on that Thursday the 13th an opportunity for folks to fire away their one-on-one questions with any of your colleagues.
Right. We'll have our
chat
specialists on for that half hour while we kind of take a break from the presentations. And so if you're wanting to discuss something, we can kind of put you off in a breakout room and you can talk about land values with Michael Taylor, or the livestock market with Glenn Tonzer, or grain markets with Dan O'Brien, or we'll have some other folks on too.
All right, then. What are the particulars for registering for this year's virtual Risk and Profit Conference?
Well, our agmanager.info website on the events has the information for this, including the schedule as well as the registration link. So folks can go find that in the events section of it, or they can send me an email, rvl@ksu.edu, and they'd be able to get in touch with me, and we'll figure it out.
And the $30 registration covers access to all of the information then during and after the program.
Yes, that's correct.
Once more, agmanager.info has all the details. You can contact Rich as well directly for more, including registration, rvl@ksu.edu. Well, Rich, congratulations to you and your team. You had to do some scrambling to make Risk and Profit happen this year, exclusively online. So looking forward to the program that week of August the 10th. Thanks for previewing it with us right here.
Thanks for having me.
Rich Llewlyn from the Agricultural Economics Department here at K-State. Once more, the 2020 K-State Risk and Profit Conference from August the 10th through the 14th. The program will be strung out through that week online, agmanager.info for all the information on it. Might mention as well before the break, K-State Agricultural Economics has also lined out now its pair of Ag Lenders Conferences. Those likewise have been well received traditionally year after year. They are a go for September the 29th in Garden City and September the 30th in Manhattan. Details coming soon, but those of you involved in agricultural financing might want to get those on your calendar. September 29, Garden City, September 30th, Manhattan, the 2020 K-State Ag Lenders Conferences. In a moment, we'll hand it on over to Jeff Wickman. He has this week's 4-H segment for you. You are tuned to Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. For over 115 years, Kansas 4-H has mobilized youth and adults to find their voice and build a sense of community. Kansas 4-H State Leader Wade Weber says the challenges of COVID-19 may have changed the methods for delivering their programs, but the 4-H mission remains the same. Wade, this is one of those times where we have been challenged, it seems like month after month, in terms of trying to do just our normal jobs the way we're used to doing them. But we are really not the only ones in 4-H. This is not the first time they face similar circumstances.
Oh, absolutely. We have a rich history of young people being involved in their community, learning to work together, to be problem solvers, to be innovative, to be creative, to expand the opportunities for young people to belong to the 4-H program all the way from our beginning back in 1905. And in a lot of respects, as we explore the situations and the unique circumstances of 2020, there is lots to be encouraged by. The resilience that young people are demonstrating, how our volunteers are collaborating with local decision makers, how our professionals are purposing to lead the 4-H mission and contextualize it to the contemporary context that we find ourselves in, no matter what the challenges are. And I think we can be encouraged by the precedent that's been set by those who went before us over the last 100-plus years within Kansas 4-H as well.
Well, and you actually had a chance to go back and look at some previous leaders and some of the things that they faced and how they handled some of those situations.
Well, I think it's really unique, again, highlighting the rich history we have within the Kansas 4-H program, going all the way back to our first state 4-H program leader. His name was Otis Hall, and he is made famous in 4-H circle because he was the one who authored the 4-H pledge that is known and loved and recited at every 4-H activity for over 100 years. And so Mr. Hall, being the first program leader, had this quote to say in particular about the purpose of the 4-H program. And he said, we're not trying to make farmers out of all these youth. We don't care how many hogs or cabbages they raise. It's the youth that we're interested in. We're trying to build self-reliance, good judgment, and character. And he closed by saying, for many, 4-H is a stepping stone to those larger life skills. And he served from the beginning of the extension movement in 1914 all the way through 1920, so right at 100 years ago. This was right before and right during World War I. We've heard about the Spanish flu epidemic that was happening at that time. So Otis Hall was the 4-H program leader during that time. And I think it really speaks to us even 100 years later, the resiliency that they were demonstrating, how they're trying to develop young people moving forward. And I think it's really something for us to be encouraged by as we think about going forward. The second one I wanted to share was Dr. Glenn Bussett, who was the state 4-H program leader from 1966 to 1981. And as we know, there was lots of challenges during the 60s and 70s related to global conflicts, issues related to public health, the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, those types of things that were happening during that time. And so there was a similar time of disruption. And the question was, how does the youth development program, what can it say to young people and to the communities as they move forward? And here's what Dr. Bussett said that I thought was really resonates for us today, too. He said, it seems to me that if we assume that the 4-H leader possesses reasonable qualities of integrity and ability, then the two essential elements of success are empathy and drive. He said empathy is the important central ability to feel as the other person does. Drive is the energy to want to do something. There is to be a delicate balance between empathy and drive. Too much empathy with too little drive will lead little to be actually accomplished. Whereas conversely, to put too much drive with too little empathy, people will often then bulldoze and harm others in the pursuit of accomplishments in order to fulfill their own ego. I think these are two timeless phrases from Otis Hall as well as Dr. Glenn Bussett talking about what are the key essential elements of the 4-H program. And I think it puts us in a great position to think about really what are some of the challenges as we think about 2020 and beyond.
You've also had an opportunity then to not only look back at what they've done, but also to kind of look forward to what you would like to accomplish and put into practice some of the things that you've learned as well.
Well, absolutely. I think this is a great time to think about where do we want to see ourselves moving and how can we help each other pursue that together. As I said before, since 1905, Kansas 4-H has been engaging young people in learning by doing project-based work in their local community and seeking to live out those civic ideals and practicing democracy, youth decision-making, 4-H club meetings, those types of things. But as we move towards what does it mean for us to move forward in 2020, obviously contextualizing our challenges and our global discussions, concerns about public health, as well as the challenges of people expanding that circle of belonging to more and more people in their community. I really see three primary things that we are to focus on, and I'm excited to join with my extension colleagues and stakeholders across our state to really pursue these three areas. One is to be flexible, adaptive, and resilient in order to keep engaging youth, their families, and our volunteers, because engagement is the key component. We can't abandon the mission. Number two, we need to continue to authentically learn from and serve with communities, families, and youth whose perspectives, histories, and background are different than ours. Learning from others to create that sense of belonging is really key to our future in 2020 and beyond. And then thirdly, how can we continue to lead through Kansas 4-H in helping create a better blended learning approach of in-person as well as distant learning opportunities that could be virtual or other kind of means along the 4-H project pathway of learning, which can lead to career and college-ready skills. Those are the three things that I think are really key for our future. Again, real quickly, number one, to be flexible, adaptive, and resilient in engaging young people and the support structures that they're a part of. Two, how do we authentically learn from and serve with communities, families, youth, and others who are different than us? And then thirdly, how can we continue to create a better blended learning approach, meaning an in-person as well as distance or electronic or virtual experiences that help young people move along those career and college-ready learning pathways that we've been celebrating for over 100 years in Kansas 4-H.
That's Kansas 4-H State Leader Wade Weber with thoughts on the future of Kansas 4-H because of COVID-19 challenges. He says that much has been learned and done, but there is much left to learn and accomplish, and that this era is ripe for innovation, confidence building, excellence, and belonging. To learn more about how you can participate in 4-H as either a member, club leader, volunteer, or supporter, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.